Hi, Shannon Waller here, and welcome to the Inside Strategic Coach podcast with Dan Sullivan. Dan, we've been talking a little bit in the workshops and also in a fabulous Facebook Live with Suvi about the general narrative versus the specific narrative, which I find completely fascinating. So can you describe what you mean by that? What is the general narrative and why is it different for some people?
Well, it's just an observation. I actually just dropped this on one of my videos. I do anywhere from 5 to 8 videos every month in our video studio, and I just happened to say that one of the distinguishing features between entrepreneurs in general and those who are not entrepreneurs in general is that entrepreneurs have a story, and the story is a specific story, whereas a lot of people are subject to mass media and popular culture, and they find themselves sort of buying into a general explanation of what's going on in the world. And what I notice is that entrepreneurs can be living in the same world that everybody else does, but they have sources of motivation and they have sources of measurement for themselves, which in a certain sense allows them to kind of ignore what's going on in the world. The progress for being an entrepreneur, as I've seen it from, let's say, in your 20s to your 70s, just to give a 50-year framework, that what happens to really successful entrepreneurs is that they ignore more and more of the general story and they expand more and more of what their specific story is. So there's a general narrative about what the world is, and the general narrative is usually defined by the mass media, the news networks. It's defined by the academic community. It's defined by the movie makers, the television makers, and they have these big general themes. It's like everybody in the world is swimming in the same swimming pool, but entrepreneurs kind of have private swimming pools. They kind of swim in the water that they make, and they actually create their own story. And this is a story both frontwards into the future, but it's also a story backwards. So I always say that we can be as creative with how we understand our past as how we're defining our future. So my story, certainly for the last 45 years, next year is my 45th year of coaching, where that's how I'm making my money. I've got a 45-year story, which has really been enormously specific. First of all, narrowing it down to a partnership with Bab Smith and myself, and then the creation of, first of all, my coaching career one-on-one for 15 years, and then it'll be 30 years next year that we've been creating the Strategic Coach program. It's grown and grown every year. We've had 29 growth years in the Strategic Coach where we've actually grown. Every year has been profitable, and we're in 3 countries now. We have clients from 30 different countries coming to Strategic Coach, and it's really, really grown, but it's a very specific story. And meanwhile, all sorts of things have been happening in the general world, the microchip revolution, the personal computer revolution, the internet revolution, social media. And these are very, very interesting things, but the outside story is only interesting to me and how it actually allows me to actually expand my personal story. So it's the difference between a general narrative being a story, and specific narrative, which is the entrepreneur's own story.
Well, it strikes me that the Strategic Coach program, in all of its different forms, Signature, 10 Times Ambition, or Game Changer, really helps people kind of have that relationship with the general narrative that you talked about. Simply, how does it inform your specific narrative and protect them where they might be buying in? Because I see entrepreneurs being successful to the degree that they really design, create, build their own specific narrative.
Yeah. One of the things that's hard really tells you the strength of what I consider the greatest strength of Strategic Coach program is actually the community, the workshop community, and then your relationship with our team at Strategic Coach, that every 90 days, regardless of what's happening in the world outside, you're able to treat that just as raw material to think about, but it's not any kind of direction on how you ought to lead your life. You know, the entrepreneurs pretty well become self-directed, self-motivated, self-managed. And then you can create an organization that's a self-managing company. And then at the higher levels of the 10 times program, it becomes a self-multiplying company. And then you just keep developing and expanding your personal narrative, specific narrative, and I think it naturally leads into you become a game changer. You start changing, you change your game, you change your teamwork game, your company game, you change your market game, and then you start changing your industry game. And we're just seeing such amazing examples in the Game Changer program, but it all comes because years ago, in some cases, not so many years ago, but they've all constantly expanded their own specific narrative out into the world. And that's really what entrepreneurism is.
That's a neat way of thinking about it. So how important, or why is it so important for people to be super clear on their specific narrative?
Well, you have a choice. Are you going to lead a life where you're in control, or are you going to lead a life where outside factors are in control? I notice people getting very, very worried about what's going on in the world. They say, the way the world is changing. And I said, well, you're really buying into someone else's description if you say that. First of all, I don't even know what the world is. Could you tell me, what's the street address of the world, or the telephone number of the world, or the email of the world? I said, it's just a theory, It's like the climate. Nobody experiences the climate. We all experience weather. And that's a good connotation. The climate is actually a theory. And as you dig into the scientific basis for the climate, you find out even the most knowledgeable scientists don't have any idea what the climate is. Or economics, people talk about the world economy. I said, I don't even know what that is. I know my clients, and I know what their aspirations are, and I know what their goals are, and I keep thinking up in Strategic Coach, and we as a company keep thinking up new ways of thinking about your own specific world, but thinking about the whole world. I haven't the foggiest idea what that is. But, in universities, the whole school system is really based on a whole series of theories about how things generally are, but it never has much bearing on how people can specifically design their own lives. So I think it plays a big part in why people become entrepreneurs in the first place, is they don't want to be subject to the general thinking of people around them. They want to create their own future based on their own talents, their unique ability, and then the teamwork they can build around their own unique ability, and then their specific goals, both personal goals and organizational goals. And that's all specific. It's not, does the world let you do this? Well, who cares? I don't even know what the world is.
And usually the world does not. It's really interested in what you're up to, or you need to be interested in what you're up to.
Yeah.
So it strikes me that this way of looking at things, Dan, is so much more empowering, which is a way overused word. But it really, that's where you have some decision making. That's where the choice is to decide, okay, what do I want? What am I going to make happen? What's my unique ability? Who do I need to surround myself with? So anyone, I think, who wants ownership over their life, and you've talked a lot in workshops and podcasts about autonomy, living according to your self-laws. I'm remembering the personal economic system, which is one of the ways we talked about the on-real time system of free focus and buffer days, is for people to realize, yes, there's a larger quote-unquote economy, but what's your personal economic system? And that's where the power is.
Yeah, and the interesting thing, just to prove the point, is that my experience of the best entrepreneurs in the program, they always make their greatest progress when other people think that there's no opportunity for progress. In other words, that they really differentiate themselves. Actually, entrepreneurs differentiate themselves more when other people think that conditions are bad than they do when everybody else thinks that conditions are good.
Love that.
It's really interesting. But I'd like to go back to empower. I think empower is exactly the right word here, that if you buy into someone else's description of the world, you do so at the price of your own power. But if you take responsibility and you say, I'm going to own my own future 100%, not only that, I'm going to own my past 100%, and I'm going to say what it means so that it propels me forward. That's a very, very specific description of a life. And it's not just entrepreneurism in the way We talk about it in Strategic Coach, but it's anyone, it could be artists, it could be, inventors, it could be anyone who just decides, well, I'm not going to live according to a set of general rules. I mean, I do respect the law of gravity. I do respect the fact that none of us has more than 24 hours in a day. So those are kind of general rules, but everybody operates within that framework. But how I use my time and how I use my capabilities, the more specific you are and the more it's time-based in the sense that by such and such date, I will have achieved this, and looking back, I've achieved that, and it's all in terms of specific relationships with team members, with your family, your friends, specific in terms of who the customers and clients are. It's all specific. No one has general customers and clients. We have specific customers and clients. So it seems kind of obvious when you put it that way, but I find that the vast majority of people are very, very influenced by the general narrative, and they feel either bad or good depending on whether they think the world as a whole is going forward. But there is no world, actually. It's just a theory. It's just a thought.
And you can be one of those forces that is moving things forward if you take ownership over your past and your future.
Yeah, but that's a result. That's a byproduct. It's like people, well, I'm saving the world. Well, I'm not saving the world. I'm filling the next workshop. I'm creating the next quarter's new concepts. I'm writing the next quarter's book. I'm doing podcasts with you. These are all specific things, and I have no control of where these things land. It's just an activity that actually makes me feel very empowered about myself on an ongoing basis. And it's kind of interesting. I'm a lot clearer about this in my 70s than I was in my 30s and 40s. I was very tied up with, where the world is going. And, it's almost like, it's a train and you have to make sure that you catch the train. But what I'm noticing more and more about myself and other entrepreneurs who've been within our community for a long period of time, that their lives are just incredibly specific. They're not using the outside theories to judge their own happiness or their own progress. They have their own basis. They have their own self-defined standards, meeting their own standards.
So that's what I was going to ask you next, Dan. For someone who really wants to implement or get clear or just even better at their own specific narrative, what are some questions they should be asking themselves or answering? What are some ways of thinking that can help them just get more grounded in the specific rather than in the general?
Well, the main question is, this is where I am today, 90 days from now. What are 4 or 5 ways that I want my life to be bigger and better? And that's the central question. And then if you just use your answer to where you want to be 90 days from now and break it down into 5 projects that are doable, and what I mean that either you can do them personally or you can collaborate through teamwork with other people to get those done. That's the only reality that you really need to deal with. The creation of a goal, a specific goal that's measurable. In other words, you can count it, or you can say, this definitely happened. It could be an event that happened. It's that willingness to live within your own game and to take ownership of your own game, I think, is really the key thought process that we have to do. It's like a strategy circle, actually, a 90-day strategy circle. The more and more I go along, we get very, very tempted to buy into, it's like Canada legalized recreational marijuana, or cannabis, as the new name is. In my day, it was called pot, marijuana, and reefer madness, we called it back then. And people said, I wonder what this is going to do. I said, I don't know. I just know that I'm not going to be smoking. I said, I'm ADD enough. I don't need any added dimensions to interfere with my thinking. So people said, well, is this going to be good or bad? And I said, well, you have to answer that on a specific basis. I'm just not going to partake in that. I've got my own distractions and things that have bogged me down that I've had to overcome in my own personal life. But that's my specific story. That's not a general story.
I love it. Well, Dan, thank you. I think, to my mind, the idea of people being clear on what the specific versus general narrative is very helpful. I love how through the workshop, through the conversations, through our tools, people are so much more empowered. So I hope if you're listening to this, you feel exactly the same way. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you, Shannon.
Great. If there's someone in your life or your network who could really benefit from what you've learned today, why not share this episode with them? You could be their hero today just by clicking share.